Welcome to today's episode. We have a very exciting guest. For those just tuning in, we are OptiMindX, and we specialize in helping businesses in the health, wellness, and entrepreneurial space streamline, automate, and scale their business using AI. If you want to take your wellness or beauty business to the next level, make sure to stick around. And if you're interested in a free growth consultation, just drop the word growth in the DMs. Before we dive in, we want to shine a light on today's featured guest, Herb Lipsman. Herb has led transformative turnarounds and growth in luxurious resorts, private equity clubs, high-end residential communities, golf operations, and upscale athletic clubs. Herb is involved currently with SOZO Clubs, an innovative wellness community concept that sits on the forefront of the $6.3 trillion global wellness economy, projected to reach $9 trillion by 2028. SOZO is reimagining how we live, connect, and thrive by integrating physical, mental, and social well-being into vibrant communities. It's not just about world-class facilities, but about building ecosystems where health and sustainability flourish. Welcome to the OptiMindX podcast, where we sit down with entrepreneurs, innovators who are shaping the future of business, health, wellness, and technology. OptiMindX shines our light on real insights, both the triumphs and the hurdles, highlighting what clients truly want rather than just what's trending. Today, we're joined by Herb Lipsman, a leader whose journey spans athletics, hospitality, and executive leadership. Herb began his career as a junior tennis coach, where he discovered the power of playing to people's strengths rather than their weaknesses. He carried those same principles into business, where his servant leadership and ability to build confidence have inspired high-performing teams. Outside of the boardroom, Herb has completed more than 40 marathons, including the 3 Boston marathons, experiences that sharpened his vision, perseverance, and grace under pressure. He's also a dedicated student and teacher of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which have shaped his empathetic and diplomatic approach to leadership. Herb, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here with us today, Herb. So we'll start with some questions about your background and entrepreneurial journey. So you began your career as a tennis pro, coaching juniors. What did that experience teach you about developing talent that you still use today?
Well, I found out very early that I could take very uncoordinated athletes and give them a little confidence early on in their lessons where they may have felt like they'd never be able to play the game. And I did it by actually making the ball go to the racket instead of having them force the racket to get to the ball. And the moment that they would hit a ball in the center of the racket on the sweet spot, they just light up. And so little by little, I could sort of spoon feed them success, and each success led to more success. And eventually some of these kids went on to be college scholarship athletes. And I was probably most proud of the success I had with the uncoordinated ones, because the ones that came to us that were really talented, that was the easy coaching.
Right.
Okay. And how did those early coaching lessons influence your transition into leadership roles in hospitality and businesses?
Everybody comes to a job with a mixed bag of skills, and sometimes what they're good at may not jump out at you initially, maybe because they're in a role that doesn't require those skills. So in my role as a leader, I've really tried hard to be observant and try to see what those skills are with each employee, and then instead of trying to force them to get better at their weaknesses, spend a disproportionate amount of time playing to their strengths, basically lining them up with jobs and tasks and responsibilities that match up with their skill set.
I think that's fantastic. It really creates an ecosystem right off the bat where people feel good about what they're doing. So it just reverberates in the space.
It's a virtuous cycle. Because when they have success, then they want to learn more. Whereas if they're frustrated because they're in a role that doesn't suit their skill set, then they day after day they're frustrated and they sort of start to give up. They feel like they can't do it.
Right. So on the note of growth and recognition, you've led all facets of luxury hospitality operations, from resorts to private clubs. So looking back, what accomplishment are you most proud of?
I would say probably the time that and I say we, I emphasize that at the Houstonian. When I was recruited to the Houstonian to run the club, they brought in another gentleman by the name of Mark Yankee to run the hotel at about the same time, and he had a very extensive background in five-star hotels and hospitality. I had a very strong background in upscale athletic club management. We came into a situation where the property was a mess. The facilities were terribly run down. They'd had all kinds of deferred maintenance that just had never been done. The culture was even worse than the facilities. The people were either apathetic or they were on the take. They were stealing from the company basically. And so we came in and we knew we had to make some pretty major changes. And one of the things that we landed on was to utilize the Stephen Covey 7 Habits program to sort of change the psychology of the entire workforce, which, by the way, they had 700 employees on that property. So we were moving a big ship, and we actually experimented with a couple sort of self created leadership programs for about a year, and we realized we just didn't know how to do it. And so that was when we looked to the Covey program, and we went, and 4 of us went and did the public training that was about 2.5 days or 3 days each. We really liked it. All 4 of us came back from separate classes saying how much we felt it was a good fit. And then that same group, we went out to the Stephen Covey, their headquarters out in Utah, and spent a week getting certified as facilitators of that program, with the intent of coming back to the Houstonian and eventually training all of our managers, and then ultimately all of the employees at the property. And so we ended up over a couple, 2-3 years, training roughly 700 employees on the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it's a program that is what it says. It's about being more effective with people. And if you're in the hotel and club hospitality business, you're dealing with people thousands of times a day, all kinds of moments of truth. And so we felt like if we could get the workforce to all be sort of pulling on the rope in the same direction, pointing to the same North Star, that we would have a much greater opportunity to be successful. And to cut to the finish line, the Houstonian went from, we started right out of bankruptcy, and it eventually, while I was there, reached about $15 million a year in EBITDA. And today it's recognized as the #1 ranked resort property in the state of Texas.
That's astonishing. That's a huge transformative story, without a doubt. And you very much touched base on the Houstonian Hotel, Club and Spa. I did want to have a little segue question. If there was a single takeaway, if you could culminate it into a single sentence of immense takeaway you had in that experience, what would it be?
Gosh, I think I'd probably say the frontline employee is the most important factor. And so in any hotel, club, or hospitality company, what happens is that the frontline employees are touching the customer hundreds, if not thousands, of times a day, and they have to want to do a good job with that moment of truth every time. And it means that they have to be treated well, and they have to be provided the tools and the knowledge and the skill to be good at their jobs, because then they're confident when they're dealing with customers. And then they also have to feel appreciated. And so what Covey taught us was that you put your employees first. You really focus a lot of attention on that frontline employee, giving them the help that they need to be successful, and then everything else takes care of itself, because you have far fewer problems. The customer's in a much better mood most of the time because they're getting treated well.
Right.
And in terms of what the employees learned during this time, what would you say that was one of those? Which one of the 7 habits from Stephen Covey was the one that really resonated with, at least with managers, or just from your server to a manager level?
For me, it was always habit 5, which is seek first to understand and then to be understood. And what that means is that if you and I, George, you and I are having a conversation, and we're having a debate in a staff meeting, and we see it very differently. What the human nature typically is for me to kind of dig my heels in and try to force you to understand how I feel. And what Habit 5 teaches is that you have a much greater chance of being effective with that person across from you if you give them the chance to voice their opinion and their view first, because it sort of disarms them. Once they get it all out, how they're feeling about something, and you genuinely listen, to understand, not to agree, but just to understand, then what happens is they're much more open-minded to listening to you, which makes you more effective. And we found at Houstonian, we found that one habit just kept playing out over and over and over again in all of our meetings. I mentioned Mark Yankee at the beginning. Mark and I were very different. Mark was a superstar attention to detail guy, and I was much more a people person. I was the one that cared. I was much more sensitive to how the person was feeling about what was going on, and he was more focused on how the room looked, and it was just a whole different view of the world. And we became very, very close friends and colleagues over the years. But the 7 habits helped us to understand each other a lot better, and so we ended up really complementing each other because of our different skill set.
Okay, that's very well said. So now moving into bottlenecks, then versus now. So reflecting back on your early leadership years, so you touched already based on the Houstonian, but what were the biggest bottlenecks you encountered as you began your career, apart from being part of the Houstonian and doing all the process and training 700 employees? What were the other endeavors that you have had taken on that were bottlenecks?
Gosh, I think in hindsight, every single place I've worked, it's always the people. And it could be the owners. You go to work with the best of intentions and you're all excited, and all of a sudden you get in, you find out you've got somebody you're working for that has a different moral compass than you do. And that can be frustrating. It can be the owners, and again, I'm just talking about this one piece. I'll get to the others in a moment. But the owners, I've heard so many times over the years, it's not about the money, but it's always about the money. And so what ends up happening is initially it's not about the money because maybe things are cruising along okay, and then all of a sudden you hit a kind of a downturn in the economy or pandemic, or maybe there's something that goes wrong with the business, and suddenly everything's about the bottom line, and they're looking at things through a microscope, and they're losing sight of the big picture because they can't see the forest for the trees, basically. And then there's also the issues with middle managers that I used to call it kiss up. The middle managers may kiss up to the leader of the organization, and so you don't get to see what they're really doing with their staff on the front line. And you come to find out after you have to make a move that everybody hated this particular manager because they were so abusive and rude and that kind of thing. So being very, very attentive to how your middle managers are treating the frontline troops, and then the frontline folks, that unless you get in there and roll up your sleeves and get dirty with them some of the time, you can't possibly know what it's really like and what they're going through. And so you may be cruising along, the bottom line looks good, customers aren't really complaining, and you think everything's wonderful, yet you have high turnover. Well, it means that those frontline people don't feel like they're being appreciated, and you're not listening to their needs. And so, but it's almost always people. And then, obviously it's cash flow. One of the things I was pretty naive when I first got into the profession, and I learned over the years, cash flow solves everything, just about. If the business is making money, you have so much more freedom to do the creative and fun things that you want to do. And if the business is struggling financially, it doesn't matter how smart you are, you're gonna have to play by a different set of rules.
And in today's age, what would you say that leaders in the health and wellness, well, in the hospitality and wellness world are facing most today?
Gosh, it's probably the hugely rapid change in technology. AI is changing everything, and it's changing not just the way that you manage your operations, for the better. I mean, it's providing all kinds of new tools to speed and streamline operations and reduce labor costs and all those kind of things. but it's completely changed the game from the frontline employee and from the members' perspective, because there's no secrets anymore. They can get the answer if they want to know what all the other clubs. If a member wants to know what all the other clubs in the marketplace are charging, they can get that answer pretty quick. Whereas in the old days, they took your word for it because they didn't want to go to the trouble of driving around town and going to every club. If they want to know what services are offered by others, they can find it online. If an employee wants to know how to do their job better, they don't have to wait to be trained by the leaders in the organization. They can look it up themselves, and they can pretty much find out all the information that they might need at their fingertips at home. And so if you're going to be effective as a leader, you have to embrace that and then get out in front of it, try to take advantage of all those changes. And unfortunately, there's a lot of folks that are stuck in their ways, and they want to put their head in the sand and pretend that this isn't happening, but it's happening. And if a year from now, it's going to be dramatically different than it is today.
Could you speak to how you are integrating systems as you move forward into SOZO? I know that is still under construction. If there's anything you can share with us, how are ways that you are looking to implement AI and technology within your systems?
Well, we will take advantage of pretty much everything that's current in technology. So we've been exploring all of the different club operating systems. So systems that do member billing, do member check-in, keep track of, allow members to make reservations, to sign up for classes, keep track of the lifetime value of a member. I mean, just on and on. There's so many systems that have been doing parts of those kind of things, and fortunately for us, we're going to get to start from scratch. So we're gonna zero in on what we think is the best in class program for that, and then so from day one, we're going to have a system that's easy to use by the staff, which then translates into them spending less time in front of the computer screen and more time serving the customer, which we think is going to be really valuable. We also are going to take advantage of facility maintenance technology. We're going to take advantage of safety and cleanliness and sanitation technology. After the pandemic, one of the things I joke about with people that are friends of mine that aren't in the business is everybody, when the pandemic was going on, every club owner and director and executive, forced their staff to go around the club with a spray bottle and a rag and wipe down equipment, as if that was going to make it safe from the pandemic. And it was nonsensical. And yet everybody was doing it because it was sort of a PR move. They had to do it so that their staff or their members would perceive that they were on top of the pandemic, right? But if you watched them closely, nobody got even close to 100% of the surfaces clean or sanitized, which meant that all another member would have to do is come in. If that was the reason for COVID, was that you touched something that wasn't cleaned properly, everybody would have had COVID. But there are ways of actually systematically keeping everything clean and sanitized. And so we're going to take advantage of what hospitals do, for instance, with their cleanliness and sanitation systems, so that we're as safe as any hospital for our customers, our members, when they come in. There are technological advances in member registration and signups for programs, and keeping track of members' historical. In the hotel business, they call it guest history. But if you go to a Ritz-Carlton, this has been going on for years in that industry. If you go to a Ritz-Carlton in Houston and you stay in a certain room, and the maid service comes in and they see where you set your shoes and your clothes, and they see what kind of wine that you ordered. When you go to that same Ritz-Carlton company in Beijing and stay at a Ritz-Carlton, they're able to pull up on their computer screen all your likes and dislikes from your other stays at Ritz-Carlton, and so they can customize your experience right when you walk in the door. We can do that in the club business as well, and SOZO plans to employ that level of member knowledge and then taking advantage of that to make the experience better for each member.
That's lovely. It doesn't get better than that you walk in and you have that wine you ordered and everything allocated just to the liking. Wow. Okay. So moving into, you dabbled in playing to people's strengths and that has been a key in growth for the businesses that you have unraveled. How have you seen playing to people's strengths? How have you seen this approach change the trajectory of teams or individuals you have mentored?
Gosh, I just actually today I posted on LinkedIn a story of a woman that was an aquatics director that I had years ago, and she was one of the most quiet and unassuming types of personalities. You never would have noticed her. I mean, but it was on purpose. She just didn't go out of her way to try to call attention to herself. But she was one of those people that was just gold and golden. She she was an aquatics director, and back in my early days, again, forgive me for keep referring to the Houstonian, but when I first got the Houstonian, one of the biggest problems I faced was members who liked to use the swimming pools. There were 3 pools on the property, and they were always upset about something. They were upset because the water temperature was too cold or too warm. They were upset because the water clarity, it was cloudy and didn't look clean. They were upset because the lifeguards were lazy and weren't doing their jobs. They were upset because the master swimming instructor didn't show up on time. On and on. And I was just getting beat up every day. There'd be a line outside my office wanting to complain about something related to the aquatics. And at that time, I had a young lady that was really, really hardworking, really was trying to do the best job possible. She just didn't know what she didn't know. And it was just too much for her. And eventually, after making a couple of changes in that position, I landed on this woman whose first name was Erica, which I wrote about today on LinkedIn. And Erica was actually managing a small apartment complex pool for a apartment development near the Houstonian that we happened to have a management contract on. So in addition to my Houstonian duties, we had to oversee this apartment complex fitness center and their pool. And Erica heard that we were having struggles, and she said, "Mr. Lipsman, I don't want to impose, but I'd be happy to help while you're looking for the next director." And so again, I said she was humble. She didn't at all try to put herself out there as if she was qualified to do it. But so I thought, well, shoot, I need help, and maybe I can calm some of the members down if I just have somebody as an interim to come in and kind of keep an eye on things, put a Band-Aid on it. And 2 weeks, 3 weeks down the road, I'm sitting at my desk one day and I go, gosh, I haven't had a single complaint about the pools for like 2 or 3 weeks. What's different? So I start snooping around and I go out there, and the water looks good, and people are in the pool, and I ask some of the master swimmers how the temperature is, and they're happy. And I look, and the lifeguards are sitting up straight in their chair and they're paying attention. I can't figure it out, honestly. It's the same pools, it's the same staff, it's the same members. The only thing that's different was Erica. And so she had quietly behind the scenes paid attention to the right things with the right amount of time and the right amount of attention, and everything kind of settled down. She was very disciplined about her inspections of the pools every day. She was disciplined about spending time with the staff and coaching them. She was very open to member criticism. So the members were now going to her instead of coming to me, because she got things done. I didn't, she was the one who could actually fix it. And so long story short, we offered her the job, and she did such a phenomenal job for us that a few years later, she came to us and said, all the members, you know it because the surveys tell you, all the members want new swimming pools. And so we did a bunch of research, and we put together a very, very extensive plan, and we ended up spending $3 million on new swimming pools right around the early 2000s for one reason, because Erica asked us to, and because she had proven that she had made the aquatics programs at the Houstonian such an important part of the membership.
It's incredible how one individual can reshape an ecosystem.
Yeah.
Completely. And even propel it forward, where if the conversation, how it did come up, that guests are looking now for a different pool experience, aquatic experience. Now the door's open because she's facilitated that ground so safely that the team on the inside feels safe enough to even make that investment.
One of the most valuable types of employees in our business is the employee that's open to member complaints. And there's some people that just their human nature, they're warm and comforting, and they're very approachable. And when you find those people, they are, like I said before with Erica, they're golden, because members then don't have to go up the hierarchy to the manager or the general manager, they get their problem solved right there on the spot. And so if you manage a club and or a spa and you have a person like that in your organization, you want to make sure and take good care of them because they're hard to come by.
Yes, sir.
So on that note, you have facilitated Stephen Covey's 7 Habits courses dozens of times, and it has been a huge part of your career. How have Think, Win, Win, and Seek First to Understand influenced your leadership over the years for everything that you have done so far until now doing ZOZO?
The Think Win Win, and it's when Covey teaches it, they emphasize the word think. In other words, it's not win-win. It's not the end result. It's the attitude you go into the discussion with. And so I try in every single discussion that I have with an employee, with a negotiation, with a business, with I'm raising funds right now for SOZO. When I go to sit down with investors or prospective investors, I want to know what their win is. Before I try to get my win, I want to find out what it is that they need for this to be a positive ending for them. Because if I know that, then I can try to work towards that for them, and they're more likely, not always, but they're more likely to want to see me win too. And so that same mentality, if you have an employee that's upset because maybe they don't like their schedule, they don't like how much they're getting paid, they don't like the way they're being treated by their manager. If you sit down with them and you seek first to understand, and you let them get it all out and kind of share how they're feeling and why, and then you try to find out. You just ask them, what would make this much better for you? What would your win be, basically? And if you can get to that, you can get them to articulate that, then you have a much better chance of trying to find a way to move them forward. You may not get all the way there, but you can meet them partway there. 7 Habits is about being more effective with people. And you're always more effective with people if they feel like that it's a mutual benefit to them. In other words, you're not trying to take something from them. You're not trying to put one over on them. You're genuinely trying to see that they get their win as well as you.
Awesome. Cool. That's very well said. In terms of going now to the endurance resilience part of your daily life. So you've run over 40 marathons, including Boston. And how has endurance training shaped your philosophy on leadership, especially in high pressure environments?
Well, when you run a marathon, it's 3 races. There's the first 5 miles or so. Most people will tell you this. The first 5 miles or so go really fast. And I don't mean that you're necessarily running really fast, but it goes really fast mentally because you're so excited and you're so fired up and you got all these people around you, and the excitement kind of carries you for the first 5 miles. And then you start to feel it, and you're not hurting. That little voice in your head's going, okay, now I got to work. And so now you go about another 15 miles and it's getting harder and harder, but you're still okay. You're starting to recognize that this isn't going to be easy. The fun of the first 5 miles is worn off. And then you get to what they call the wall at somewhere around mile 19 or 20, where your body's broken down and now it's just misery. And now you're going to fight through it. If you really are determined, you're going to fight through it for 6 miles of misery all the way to the finish line. And that's on a good day. That's when the weather's good and everything's perfect. On a bad day, when you got rain and snow and cold and wind and blisters and everything else, it could be the whole 26 miles could be misery. And that I've been in those as well. But what happens is after you get to the finish line, you think that you're superhuman, and you start to realize that there really isn't anything that you can't overcome. If you are willing to tough it out and you're willing to sort of put mind over matter and control your thoughts, you can just about do anything. And that's true in business too. I'm old enough to have lived through 9/11. I was managing the Houstonian when 9/11 hit. I'm old enough to have gone through the huge financial crisis of the 2008. When home prices went down to almost nothing, and stock market fell and everything else, And then of course going through the hurricanes that have hit Houston during the time that I've been here, and businesses closing down, and then the pandemic, and going through all of those things is like running a marathon. You come up against something that you didn't count on that just takes you back, and it makes you want to quit, and you find a way to work through it. Then you sort of get smarter and more resilient every time. And that's how it was with the marathons. I got to the point where I could almost not train like you're supposed to for a marathon, and I was so confident I could do it that I would just go out and go run a marathon. And I wouldn't advise that for people, by the way. but I mean, when you've gone through all those crises and you've survived it, you start to build up a very thick skin, and you're confident you can get through just about anything.
Awesome. That's waking up be like, oh, I'm gonna just run the marathon today without training, but that's pretty cool. I haven't run a marathon myself, but I mean that seems like very strenuous and definitely a lot of training and a lot of mind and focus to be able. And you said a thick skin to be able to go through that challenge. So now diving more into ZOZO, right? So ZOZO Clubs and the global wellness economy. So Herb, you're involved with ZOZO Clubs, which is positioned in the rapidly expanding 6.2 trillion global wellness economy. Can you share the vision behind ZOZO? And you touched about it more in the technology side of AI and how you're planning to like organize the clubs within technology, but can you share the vision, other visions that you have within the club itself?
Sure. My two co-founders and I all had similar experiences. We're all veterans of the industry, and we were all members of other clubs over the years. And we all had the experience of going into a club and being at the club for many, many years. And not a single time did an employee of the club make any effort to introduce us to another member. And so, the three of us were all pretty outgoing personalities. So we made friends, and we kind of formed our own tribes in the club. And we hung out with the people that had similar interests or whatever, but we did that ourselves. The club didn't do that. And what I found over the years was that all of the clubs in the industry, not all, the vast majority of clubs in our industry are focused on better facilities, better programs, and better services so that they can sell more memberships. Our industry is a selling machine. It focuses way more emphasis on the front end on selling the membership. But most of those companies that exist today will sell Melanie the membership, and they'll show her all the features of the club. They'll talk about the cool programs that she'll enjoy, and they'll sign her up and take her money, and then she's on her own. And if she's fortunate enough to meet a staff person or a member early on that becomes a friend and kind of helps her get comfortable in the club, she might become a long-term member. But for most, that doesn't happen. Most folks, they come and go. They get on their treadmill. They go to the weight room. They take a class here and there, but they don't ever form that connection with the club, and they end up leaving because they don't see the value. And you probably know that the statistics are that last year the Health Fitness Association did their annual study, and the health club industry had its highest penetration rate in history last year of adults in the United States becoming members of health clubs and gyms. And it was 25%. That was the highest it's ever been, which is embarrassing because we've been in industry for more than 50 years. And so what's wrong that those other 75% don't want to come to a club? And this is just my own philosophy, but from being in the weeds with the members and the staff for 40 plus years, what I can tell you is they don't feel comfortable in the club environment. It's not for me. I go to the gym and I see all these people that know what they're doing, and they look like they know what they're doing, and they know how to do the movements in the classes, and they know how to use the equipment, and they're fit, and I'm fat, and I'm out of shape, and I haven't exercised for years, and it's not for me. Or I'm embarrassed because I don't feel like I can keep up, or they're just not nice to me. Everybody's doing their own thing and they're ignoring me. And so all those things make it harder to go to the club. Well, maybe the club's dirty. It's just I pull up in the parking lot and there's trash everywhere, and it's just a turnoff. I didn't want to go anyway, and now I get there and it's like a pit, and I'm not going to waste my time. And so what we think is that in addition to being able to do a much better job of operating the clubs at a very, very high standard, similar to what you'd find at a five-star hotel, we feel like we know better how to integrate members into the club, and we have our own methodology, and it's from years and years of experience, and we're going to employ that, and we're going to make a difference. And we're 100% confident that our approach is going to work. It has worked for us at our own locations previously, but we're gonna institutionalize it.
Awesome. That sounds like a awesome, amazing view for what this club will bring, and it will bring definitely a new fresh taste to what health clubs should really be about than what has been for the last, like you said, 50 years. Hopefully that's 25% goes to 50% and higher. So,
Yep.
and a quick turnaround. So your club, would this be adults only, or would it be also with children?
Yeah, we've decided to focus on adults. And by the way, I have 4 grown children and 8 grandchildren, and my partners have kids as well and grandkids. So we love kids, but we feel like that there's a need, particularly in this time of high anxiety in the world, because of all the different external factors, that people need a place that they can go and get away from all that. And so we're going to carve out our niche with adults only.
Awesome. Cool. That sounds good. It's a good honing into something very specific and trying to make it the best possible, best experience possible. So going into reflection and hypothetical changes, if you go back to the start of your leadership career, what would you do differently if that were to be the case?
I'm too trusting. I've gotten burned a few times over the years by bad owners, and I've had some great owners, by the way. I'm not going to tell you which are which, but I've had some really bad ones, and I just, I wanted it to be the way they told me so badly that I just believed things without really looking under the hood before I got involved with them, and then I found out otherwise, that they were not who they represented themselves to be. And that's painful, because you give everything you've got to try to do a good job, and you're also trying at it. The roles that I was in was always in leadership roles, so I was setting an example for others, and the people above me were not setting that example. They were doing just the opposite, and so you start to have your own reputation questioned. And I in hindsight, I would have been much more careful on some of those situations. You can't be 100%, but I think I could have had a better batting average. Secondly, I would say that I had a tendency early in my career to overpromise and underdeliver. And so again, I was the eternal optimist. It's going to be great. We're going to sell all these memberships. Everything's going to be wonderful, and we're all going to live happily ever after. Like I said in the marathons, it doesn't always go your way. And the older Herb, the wiser Herb, is now coaching himself. No, don't do that. No, just tell it like it is. Lay out the facts, and then get everybody on board with what the solutions are together, as opposed to trying to sugarcoat it and then have people go run off and make decisions based on not realistic forecasts.
Okay. So on that note, if you had a magic wand to solve one recurring challenge in hospitality management, what would it be?
Gosh, I'd probably go back to what I started with, is being able to have all servant heart, kind, caring people working at the club. Because if those people are doing the kind of job that I'm going to be expecting for those that work at SOZO, there'll be so few problems to deal with. You'll be more on you'll be able to be creative all the time, because you won't have to be putting out fires. There's one of the videos, they call them vignettes, that the Covey program has, is they studied a fire department in a town that had initially, when the current fire chief came into the management role, they had a very high incidence of fires around the city. And so instead of going and getting better at putting out fires, what they did was they focused on fire prevention. And so they employed all of the things that we're all beneficiaries of now today, where they'd inspect buildings on the front end, make sure they had the sprinkler systems, make sure they all had fire extinguishers, make sure they had training programs for the staff. And so the fire department instead of spending 90% of their time putting out fires, they were now spending 90% of their time preventing fires. And that analogy is absolutely fitting for our industry. Is if you do a really good job of preventing fires, and you do daily inspections, and you're making sure that the place is clean and everything is working, and you're out on the floor talking to your staff to find out what challenges they're facing, and you're talking to members, and you're creating systems that allow the members to provide ongoing feedback, so you don't get surprised with something that's been festering for weeks or months, blowing up in your face. That's fire prevention. And if you do a really good job of fire prevention in the club business, there aren't any fires. There's certainly going to be somebody that trips and falls and hurts themselves. There's going to be somebody that doesn't like the way a certain class is taught or whatever. But those aren't fires. Those are little what do you call a cinder? The little flames. Not a full-fledged fire. Yeah.
Okay.
On that note, I want to say there's a quote in Spanish that says, "Guerra avisada no mata soldado." So when you have a war that's being advised, you can protect your soldiers.
That's great. Yep.
So Herb, you have blended coaching, leadership, and endurance into your philosophy. Has your mission evolved over time, if it has?
I think I'm the same person. I think I had in me, and it's probably from my parents and my friends and my family upbringing, I really care about the people I'm around. And so that's not fake. It's always been that way. And there's a lot of people like that, by the way. It's not just me. But what's happened is I've just gotten smarter about this business. I love the business. You can't go 24/7. Our industry is 24/7. Even when the club's closed, if you're the manager, you're working, because there's going to be a fire alarm that goes off at night, or there's going to be somebody didn't show up for the 4 a.m. opening the club thing, or there's members that are upset about some new rule or policy. And so you're always thinking about the business, and you couldn't do that for the number of years that I've done it if you didn't love it. You have to really enjoy the challenges and enjoy the people. And what I've learned is that early on, I was trying to do it all myself, and I felt like I had to fix it. And what I've grown over and over again, learn over and over again, is that you need to delegate. You need to train people, hire people, and train people, and delegate, so that you've got an army of people out there doing it, and it's not just you. And then the other thing is you got to have your eyes and ears open all the time to paying attention to what's really going on. If you don't see for yourself how the club is being run day in and day out, then you can't make informed decisions, and you're going to make bad decisions.
Right. Well, we have reached the rapid fire wrap up. So the first question we have is, one lesson you'd tell your younger self. Trust and verify. One breakthrough tool, strategy, or partnership that accelerated your leadership journey.
7 habits of highly effective people.
Okay. And finally, one current trend in hospitality, wellness, or leadership that you are most excited about.
Utilizing AI to its fullest in the club and spa environment.
Love that. All right. And to wrap up today's podcast, we have a final question regarding team and leadership. What qualities do you look for when building or mentoring leaders? Grit has been a recurring theme across our interviews. Does this resonate with you?
It does. Again, it goes back to my marathoning. It's all about grit for everybody, whether you're the fastest runner or whether you're the slowest runner. Going 26 miles it takes grit. And I think in our environment, particularly for leaders, managers, and department heads and that sort of thing, you're going to face all kinds of challenges day in and day out. No day is the same as yesterday. And so you've got to have a certain toughness to you to be able to persevere through some of the pain, because there's going to be things that go wrong.
All right, Herb, thank you so much for sharing your story and your insights with us today. It's been a real pleasure learning about your journey from coaching junior tennis players to leading transformative change in hospitality and beyond. Your focus on strength, resilience, and servant leadership is truly inspiring. And to all our OptiMindX listeners, thank you for tuning in. We hope you found as much value in this conversation as we did. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with a friend, and keep the conversation going with us on all our platforms. Till next time, OptiMindX listeners and Herb, thank you again, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.